my name is Samantha Coyle. Today we'll go over a project with AI-driven code generation for workflows. So let's go with the workflow. We'll first discuss what Dapr Workflows are. Then we'll go into how you can create them easily with Workflow Composer. Then we'll talk about three main aspects of Workflow Composer, which is the intermediate representation, the graph, code generation, and wrap up from there. How many of you are familiar with Dapr Workflows? Okay, a few hands, that's cool. For those of you that don't know, Dapr is the distributed application runtime. It works to make the lives of application developers easier, and it's around the 10th largest CNCF project, so it's got a very large open source community and a lot of large enterprises that rely upon it. And you can see a lot of good in this slide as to why, from all of the different SDKs and a ton of different APIs. We'll focus in on the Workflow API today, and it's totally vendor neutral, which is really important for an open source project. And it's also running on the International Space Station, so it can also be seen extremely at the edge. Yeah, pretty cool. So a workflow is merely a business process. And you can see an example here on the slides of a conference presentation workflow, where I might be using the Dapr Go SDK and write this application, where I'm waiting for an external event, maybe an email from Heather and the team saying if I get accepted or not for GopherCon, and a few different activities thereafter, where an activity is a basic unit of work in a workflow. Maybe I don't get accepted, and so I want to store this call for paper to improve upon for the future. Or maybe I get excited and I get accepted, and so I stream my excitement onto a message bus. But naturally, if I've got this application deployed, there are so many aspects that I have to be mindful of, like fault tolerance, observability, resiliency, yada, yada. Like there's a lot to it, and that's where Dapr really comes into play. For the Dapr Workflow API specifically, you author your workflows as code in the language of your choosing. And so the workflow logic lives within your application and gets orchestrated by the Dapr Workflow engine running in the Dapr sidecar via a gRPC stream. Since Dapr workflows are stateful, they're long-running and fault-tolerant. And they also work seamlessly with all of the other Dapr APIs and building blocks. We wanted to build a free solution to help author workflow code that builds in resiliency, workflow durability, and workflow best practices through Workflow Composer. And it's really cool. You can generate Go backend code from a diagram. Super neat. So I can take my example here, or you could even hand draw a diagram of a workflow, and it'll generate a complete solution that you can then customize from there. So initially, we went about this with a straight shot. Hit the LLM provider and give this to the end user. But that didn't lead for a good user experience because, hallucinations and non-compilable code. So we went about it with an intermediate representation instead. And this is where we had a prompt and the input image that we gave to the LLM provider using the Anthropic SDK and a Claude Sonnet model. We then got the intermediate representation, or the IR. And I like this visual because it showcases the streamability that we were going for. Each line of our IR was a complete JSON object that could be parsed independently. So this allowed us to parse far greater diagram sizes line by line without exceeding memory or token limits. Also, we could do real-time processing, streaming the IR generation results to our clients via server-sent events, or SSE, allowing users to see real-time progress and errors as soon as they occur. This translated into a pretty beefy IR struct using our type safe Go, and we were then able to push on and work on our graph. So this is a very high level of what it looked like to build our workflow graph. We took in the intermediate representation and we spit out a workflow graph. And this is obfuscating a lot that goes on under the hood, but to provide some clarity, the blue is kind of some of the things that we would fill in. We used the business process model and notation, or BPMN. It's a standardized graphical notation used to visually represent business processes. And so it allowed us a consistent and complete way to safely traverse and build out our graph. So for our graph traversal, we implemented the visitor pattern. The visitor pattern is a design pattern that allows you to separate the algorithm from the object structure that it's operating on. The object structure here is our workflow graph. The algorithm is the base visitor responsible for the graph traversal. It was in charge of a few different things, from the order in which to visit the nodes, things like detecting convergence points, handling conditional branching, and even if I had a parallel section, it would handle that too. But it doesn't tell you how to generate the code. And that's where the code builder comes into play. It's an interface that was implemented by each language type that we had to support. The language-specific visitors handled the code generation separately from the underlying workflow graph object. And this is kind of what that looked like. It's just a little snippet of a very beefy interface where we built out all of the different workflow aspects, and workflows can get really complicated. So again, just a snippet. That brings us to the code generation. We had to support a ton of different languages because Dapper has a ton of different SDKs. And so these were a few of the languages we supported. And to keep our sanity in generating code in all of these languages, we used language generators, where we built in things like using the embed package for a static file template for things like a README or a makefile or a Dapper multi-app run file, so the static content. And we also dynamically filled things in. Each language generator had their own functions to build out the relevant workflow code section, such as generate event call, to create the code if it were to be executed in parallel or not, abiding by each language-specific idioms and best practices. And that translated into a complete solution that you could then further customize. To wrap up, Workflow Composer is free. It's a really great starting point if you're not super familiar with workflows or Dapper, and it allows you to greenfield, and it's really helpful if you're a visual person. So Dapr Workflows has a ton of really great things coming out in 1.16 and the 1.17 release. That'll be by end of year. And also Dapr Agents is a thing, and it uses Dapr Workflows under the hood to build durable and reliable agents. So pretty cool, and thank y'all so much.